the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. When it comes to great queens, few come close. Her marriage to a duke 11 years younger created a power couple unequalled. She is the mother of two of the most famous kings in history. Her story is one of chivalry, romance, dedication and defiance. She is no kept woman, and her actions against her tyrannical husband would incur a king's wrath. This is her story.
Oh, recap?
No.
I'll watch the playlist then.
Playlists are fun!
Eleanor of Aquitaine was Queen of France, having been married in the summer of 1137, when she was only in her mid-teens. Her coronation was in the Christmas of that year. Hers, though, not Louis's, as he's already been crowned during his father's lifetime, a French custom. So now, Eleanor had power. Co-ruling the kingdom from the royal palace in Paris, which she has demanded be drastically altered. She is already challenging the conservative minds of the French nobility, introducing provincial concepts like jongleurs and troubadours, whose poetry and songs told stories of love and romance, dashing knights bedecked in chivalry, going on great adventures, catching eyes of beautiful submissive maidens who lust after them. Stories so unrealistic even for the 12th century that they read more like a Mills and Boon novel, complete with happy ending. But they are all the rage in the Occitan-speaking Provence, and are now imported into the French courts, because if Eleanor cannot reside in Aquitaine, then Aquitaine will come to Paris. This is the era of courtly love. From our own modern perspective, a few of these troubadours' works read more like an Indiana Jones movie. Let's reimagine Indy as a knight, especially in the Last Crusade. A lady from the 12th century would absolutely love that movie, especially it contains the cup of Christ, the Holy Grail. He keeps his faith. Okay, sure, he doesn't get the girl in this one, but there are other movies. And personally, I quite like Dial of Destiny. Phoebe is brilliant. Anyway. Other ladies might prefer the music video to Ultravox's Love's Great Adventure. And don't be fooled into thinking these were dainty works aimed at giggling young women in the Queen's court. Oh God, no. They were often bawdy, sleazy, encouraging excess, some even bordering on a Jackie Collins novel. Especially the romance of flamenca, pretty much a love dodecahedron playing out in a nightly tournament. And by poetry, don't imagine some flouncy, clever wording where only the highly educated can appreciate the nuances. Because the greatest troubadours of the era, men like Bernard de Ventadorn and Girard de Bonnet, are pushing the style of the troubadour, a more simplified approach to poetry that made it accessible by all. Anyone can read their works, not just the elite. This is for the masses.
Ooh, I like it already.
Do we get anything?
And it's not just a man's world either, as you have the Troubadours, the female troubadour. The romance of flamenca is written by a woman. Other examples of troubadours being the Comtesse de Deer, who travelled in the circles of Ventadorn, and her works often read more like a modern love song, often including lovelorn women or those reminding the audience of their innocence in the face of betrayal. And then we have the works of one 13th century troubadouress, the Beatrice of the Roman, and her works are bordering on lesbian fantasy novels. Some of the more bawdy troubadours would make Chaucer blush. The overindulgence and excess of not only Eleanor but her entourage is causing a stir, especially when contrasted with her husband, the King of France, who was a deeply religious man, focused on his faith, stemming from his childhood in the church. He even helps the priests out at Mass. He's singing in the choir. He's often praying with monks. What's more, he dresses humbly. And I don't mean humbly for a king. He abhors fine clothing. He could easily be mistaken for a clerk. And do remember, he's only king because his elder brother died, followed by his father. His heart belongs to the church. His critics would say he's a child in a man's body, prone to outbursts of temper, innocent-minded, and they have reason to say this, as on the day of the wedding, he was only around 17 years old. He's barely mature enough to rule his own kingdom, and more on that in a bit, and he's repeatedly letting his feelings getting in the way of his rational decisions. Eleanor is also a child, at least by modern standards. She's around 15, but her lifestyle and maturity is more like a woman. She could probably drink King Louis under the table. She loved the pomp and ceremony. He detested it. The only thing they had in common was most likely a lust of power, as the French king saw himself as God's vice-regent on earth. The royal couple could not be more misaligned. And even though Louis loved her dearly, he's besotted with her, the fact that no children would be born for around 7 years indicates that the romance part was more than lacking. Okay, they did appear to try early on, but poor Eleanor suffered a miscarriage. Still, even this occurred 2 years into the marriage. Not a good start if you're trying to continue the royal line. All Louis's affections appear to be childish, according to his critics. Also, he's showering her with gifts at every opportunity, and naturally, a headstrong woman like Eleanor walked all over him. She's getting everything she wanted, whether it was changes to the castle or a complete makeover of the living standard. Even overhauls to the palatial gardens. Yes, I know. The UK isn't around yet. It's a Sex Pistols reference. Bite me. Now, I will deviate briefly, as trouble is brewing over in England and nearby Normandy. Right, anyone following this series will know that the King of England, King Stephen, was a bit naughty, and there's a bit of a debacle going on. Yeah, it's a bit of an understatement. It's all about to kick off. Basically, when Henri I died in 1135 with no male heir, as his only son had passed away some years ago in the White Ship disaster, Henry decides that his daughter, Empress Matilda, would inherit the throne. I mean, she's got experience. She once co-ruled the Holy Roman Empire, right? She's fully qualified. But Stephen of Blois had a problem with this. Whoa, I know, steady on, right? Oh, we can't have any of this wokery going on in the 12th century. Far too controversial. A woman doing a man's job? Flabbergasted. And that's pretty much what Stephen of Blois' thought process worked like. So he raced to London and usurped the throne. Snatching her inheritance and her kingdom, he's crowned himself as King Stephen. Yeah, well, Matilda wasn't having any of his lip. So in 1138, war breaks out. A war known as the Anarchy.
C'est la merde. Les roast-beef se battent en vous.
Oh, I concur, sire.
Back in France, Eleanor had a problem, in the form of Abbot Suger. You see, Louis knew he himself was inexperienced, and often turned to the abbot for good advice. After all, he was his most trusted advisor. And Suger was a peasant from humble origins who rose through the ranks and now held significant power. He was a medieval success story. Suger is also dedicated absolutely to the French crown, to the extent that he's moulding it, shaping it, encouraging rituals and customs more in alignment with the stauncher side of the church. He's rebuilt the Abbey of Saint-Denis in a spanking new Gothic style. He's making sure France stays on the map, despite its many enemies. Then, after being criticised for lavish spending, he resorts to living in just one room in the Abbey, a small cell with no luxuries, no furniture. Suger practices what he preaches. This clashed with the young Eleanor's ambitions, as surely Louis would take her advice. It's her duty, her right. And traditionally, especially in France, the Queen was chief advisor to the king. Her Eve to his Adam. But Suger saw only apples and snakes. And Eleanor began to resent the low-born abbot and all his traditionalist church cronies. And it's quite interesting to read this side of Eleanor, as she's known for being deeply religious, dedicated to the church. In the future, she becomes a nun. Yet here you have a headstrong young woman bossing around the royal court who weren't entirely happy about it. I will also add that so much of what we know about Eleanor as a Queen of France doesn't come from the main chroniclers of the era, as you'd expect. I hate to foreshadow, but the French made attempts to purge her name. She pretty much came to boo. Much of what we do know comes from the figures she came in contact with, people that wrote about her, whether they loved her or despised her. Men like Suger. And he's complaining that many of the king's clerical advisors had been dismissed. Eleanor's work, and those clerics that remained, were loyal to her. To top it all off, she was also convinced that her counsel trumped all others, as she was queen and much better suited to advise the king. Of course, in an ideal world, the marriage would be annulled, especially with the lack of an heir. But France needed the inheritance. There's a lot of politics involved in this, so the marriage stayed. Instead, Abbot Suger blocks her from influence at court, reining in the stubborn Eleanor. Too young, too inexperienced, way too baldy for a conservative court, she should shut up. She was making enough enemies in the nobility as it was. Many simply didn't like the overindulgent Occitan minx, a southerner, a bad influence. But unfortunately, what goes in the royal solar, the royal quarters, Suger has no control over, and here Eleanor works on Louis. Here she continues to manipulate the court, because Louis is besotted by the bawdy bundle of bad influence. He loves her, he listens to everything she says, but like the biblical apple, Suger had bitten off more than he could chew, as he'd just broken up a long-held French tradition. For the first time in generations, the Queen was not present at court, not in public life, not in any political role. She's not mentioned as being present in any records for a decade. Yet, Eleanor still held all the power. Back in private, in the solar. Yep, Louis is whipped. Also, going back to 1137, Poitiers had broken off, declaring themselves as independent, rejecting both Louis and Eleanor. And it took a military force occupying the city for them to begrudgingly give fealty to the king. However, oddly, Louis lets the people of Poitiers keep their newly created commune as long as they were loyal, though he did demand hostages, that is, the sons of the nobles, to ensure the loyalty. very controversial and complaints were made. Abbot Suger races to Poitiers to see what's going on, only to find children in tears being loaded into wagons, destined to become hostages of the king. Her parents were wailing, not knowing the fate of their sons. Abbot Suger asked the king, "What the bloody hell's going on?" And Louis listens to Abbot Suger and heads back to Paris, to the relief of everyone, and the children are returned to their families. But Eleanor, she's furious. A king should show strength. A king has absolute power over his subjects. What's more, they were only his subjects through her. And Eleanor absolutely opposed this Poitevin commune. She wanted it conquered, subdued. Instead, her weak husband had listened to Suger. So from now on, she demanded that Louis listen to her. And Louis took a bite of that proverbial apple. Like I said earlier, he's whipped. Until Louis de Gros passed away, the Queen of France was Adelaide de Maurienne. She had advised her husband in any way she could. Her name is on many charters. Upon Le Gros's death, she continued to play an active role in politics. The Dowager is in every way Eleanor's counterpart. And Adelaide isn't of great age, not by any means. She's only in her 40s. And moreover, she was a mother. King Louis VII was her son. Adelaide is about to go full Mama Bear. The Queen Dowager had never liked Eleanor, opposed the marriage from the start, but listened to her husband. This was the future of France. But now her husband is gone and the gloves are off. And this feud gets petty. Unlike the men, the women are not lopping off hands or gathering troops to wage bitter war. Well, unless you're Empress Matilda. The women are going full bitch mode. Rumours, piglet bites, it gets nasty. Adelaide is criticising Eleanor in every matter, from her clothes to her manners, to her ignorance of French customs, even her reluctance to learn the langue d'oil of the standard French. You see, we've still got the d'oil d'oc divide here. Eleanor speaks a different dialect. She has a thick Occitan accent, and Adelaide is being snooty about it. But Eleanor gave as good as she got, and the two were going hog wild. It's not recorded, but any woman will know that behind the scenes there would have been tears on both sides. Vicious words were said. One had recently lost her father, the other lost her husband. Made worse by Suger limiting Eleanor's presence at court. Still, Eleanor won, and the Queen Dowager, Adelaide, retired from the political sphere, pretty much. By 1141, Adelaide had remarried to Matthew de Montmorency, a relatively minor lord who served as constable to the king, first Louis le Gros and now his son. And Matthew also had connections to England through his marriage to Alice Fissoir, the illegitimate daughter of the previous king, Henri I. So yes, that does mean that this French knight was married to the granddaughter of who we call William the Conqueror. Alas, Alice Fissoir had passed away, hence the new marriage to the Queen Dowager. Though what he thought of the anarchy, we can only guess. But Eleanor and Adelaide do have one thing in common, and neither are fans of Abbot Suger, because the manipulative abbot had pulled this rubbish before, trying to shut Adelaide out of the political sphere for having too much power over her king. It didn't work then, and it is not working now. What's more, most likely due to overstretching resources, King Louis's presence in Aquitaine itself was pretty low level, relying more on his officials. So he doesn't have much authority there at all, outside of garrisons in some of the castles. All the while, Eleanor visits every now and then, and when Louis does visit, Eleanor is always by his side. But more than often, when Eleanor visited her Aquitaine lands, she did so with her equally overindulgent sister, Petronilla, who's got an even worse reputation as a provincial party girl, and things are going to get worse for the Occitan sisters. Let's take a brief detour and get some context to Eleanor and the women in her court, as there is another important figure who strongly criticises her. Bernard of Clairvaux. He isn't a fan. We've met Bernard before, in the first episode, his Cistercian monk who once convinced her father, Guillaume, to give his support to the Pope during a schism in the church. And one day he'll become a saint. Saint Bernard. He's pretty much opposed to everything Eleanor does, and most likely shared Adelaide's opinion that Eleanor was devoid of faith. Bernard of Clairvaux preferred a simplified approach to the teachings of Christ. He opposed the opulence of the church, wasn't a fan of the new Gothic style, and in 1139 he was teaching in Paris. Here he would have seen firsthand what others had been complaining about. Now, Bernard was a very tolerant man for his time. Even so, his tolerance ended with Eleanor. Bernard also was a student of Mariology, which is the cult of the Virgin Mary. Not a cult on Italian plumbers. So it makes sense that when he meets Eleanor, he's appalled, and he writes a letter to a woman known as Sophia, a scathing letter with the intention of urging Sophia to keep her faith and remain a virgin. He paints Eleanor as extravagant, explains that she only wears dresses of the best wool or silks. Her expensive fur cloaks were lined and boasted a rich border. And then you had the jewellery, as Eleanor and her ladies would wear multiple bracelets up their arms. Large pendants with lavish stones hung from their ears. Bernard was appalled by what they wore as a wimple. Take in mind, this is the 12th century. Eleanor and her ladies wore a square of linen, the finest linen, that was draped across the neck and shoulders, hanging off the left arm. Usually would fasten them with a fillet or a circlet of gold. For context, let's look at Islam, as headwear wasn't too dissimilar back then. This lovely lady is dressed pretty much in line to what Bernard would support. She's modest. Her headwear is akin to the wimple of a nun, while this lovely lady wears her scarf pretty much as Eleanor is said to have worn her linen. A piece of fabric loosely draped around the neck and shoulders. For the 12th century, pretty racy. So a student of Mary would probably think they're taking the... you know what I mean? And we can't even discredit the clergyman, as others support his claim, like a Geoffroy of Weir, a monk and chronicler. And he's having kittens, because he's complaining that the ladies of the court slash holes in their dresses to show the lining beneath. They even cut holes in their mantlets and sleeves, so they resemble hermits, then tie the corners of their robes into knots. They even painted their faces. Though they weren't goths, they wore makeup. Though Eleanor did love the Gothic style, anyway. They wore the furs of squirrels, opulence that France's vassals simply weren't going to accept. She was very controversial. You absolutely do not see this in a reenactment, anywhere. All those bracelets, the earrings, cutting the dresses to show the things underneath. Sounds more like a medieval Madonna in her prime, or a Michaela Strachan, the UK Madonna, and it wasn't the kind of Madonna which Bernard of Clairvaux was looking for. No, he was appalled. Anyway, tangent over, I just thought I'd give you a bit more of an idea of how people saw her. Whew! Right. Let's return to the political situation with the two Occitan sisters, Eleanor and Petronilla, as they and their entourage are causing a stir in the royal courts with their outrageous clothes, baldy troubadours, and overindulgent lifestyle. Eleanor may have been sidelined at court by Suger, but she still hogs all the power, and now she's settled in, she's about to flex her political muscles. But 1141 is a very busy year, so I'll deal with Petronilla first. Another opponent of Suger was Count Royal of Vermandois. Remember him? I mentioned him briefly in the last two videos. He was at the wedding. He was the Seneschal of France under the previous king, and is also old friends with the Dowager, Adelaide, and both are working against Suger. And Count Royal is a married man, married to the Countess of Champagne. But he's quickly seduced by the flirtatious Petronilla, and the two begin an affair. He's also pushing 60, and she's only 16. Politically, it's all about to kick off. And politically, France is growing, and the map is looking good. Combined with Eleanor's domains, it stretches all the way from Paris to Aquitaine, with a few loyal vassals on the outskirts. Their rivals were chiefly busy with affairs in England with the anarchy. Empress Matilda, the Lady of the English, is married to Geoffroy Plantagenet, the Count of Anjou, King Louis's main rival. So even though he's not personally joining his wife in England, and he's getting flack for that, he's certainly supporting her. And in 1141, with no real enemies to fight, Louis, King of France, looks to expand his most southern borders, to Toulouse to be precise. A domain that belonged to a loyal vassal who had attended the wedding, Alfonso Jourdan, the Count of Toulouse. Why? Well, most likely the machinations of Eleanor, as she had argued that it had belonged to her via inheritance from her grandmother, Philippa of Toulouse. And Louis had taken it upon himself to conquer the domain, hoping to add it to the lands of France, setting off with an army on the 24th of June. He leaves Eleanor at Poitiers before heading south to Toulouse.
Oi. Oh, merci.
Upon arrival, the French king discovers that Alfonso Jourdan has already been informed of the invasion. He's prepared very good defences. And the bugger was, Louis had raced off so quick, he'd neglected to bring any war machines. So the siege of the city was absolutely pointless. Currently, there was nothing he could do. Worse was to come. As King Louis was in such haste, he'd also neglected to keep Suger and the other magnates in the loop. The result was a disaster, as everyone important withdrew their support. People like Theobald, the Count of Champagne. The Count was even refusing to send troops or even finance the war effort, pretty much leading the grumblers against the king. And this means that Louis is now stuck in Toulouse, looking like a smacked bottom. No other option remained but to tuck his tail between his legs and retreat his armies back to Poitiers. Louis is furious, but powerless, so he and Eleanor, plus her sister, spent the rest of the summer going from castle to castle, living the high life, even spending some time at the chateau at Talmont. Hunting, feasts. By autumn, they were in Paris. Oh, yes. And what is Petronilla doing? She's still having it off with Raoul of Vermandois, who's married to the sister of Theobald, Count of Champagne, who naturally isn't entirely happy. Then, the randy old sod, Vermandois, rejects his marriage to his wife, and Eleanor helps him get it annulled, and this allows him to marry the much younger Petronilla. So Theobald, naturally, pretty much flips his lid. Now, the two counts were already rivals as it was, only putting their differences aside for the wedding, but dumping his sister. This is beyond the pale. I'll add another rogue element, as King Louis is also having trouble with the church. He's trying to block the appointment of the Archbishop of Bourges, because it's a priest who he doesn't like. The clergy want a chap called Pierre. Louis doesn't. So the King of France is currently whining about it to Pope Innocent II, who straight up tells him where to go and how to get there. He'll even draw him a map if he liked. Mongrel. As punishment for this lip, Louis is scolded like a schoolboy for his insolence. He's told he's a mere child. Then the Pope pretty much orders the other magnates to rein in the whippersnapper. When Louis hears this, he totally wigs out. He's going spare. Get this. Louis makes an oath on holy relics that as long as he draws breath, Archbishop Pierre will never set a foot in the city of Bourges. Holy relics! The King of France is on the verge of excommunication. But he tries to act smart. He simply tells the Pope that he can't be excommunicated because he swore an oath on holy relics and can't take it back. Give me strength. And all the blame is about to be put squarely at Eleanor's feet. Because of her machinations, she's already got a bad reputation, and if you give a dog a bad name, you can hang him by it. The result? Pope Innocent II places the entire household under a religious interdict, banning them from holy sacraments. Powerful stuff. And we'll get into that next time.